who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. The word of the Lord.
Well, we are in our last sermon in our series on discipleship knowledge. And again, we've been working through Matthew's Sermon on the Mount. Jesus, after he calls his disciples, sits down with them and begins to explain to them just what it means to be a disciple, what it is that Jesus has called them into. And as our ministry theme this year is on discipleship, we have been listening in with Jesus. Whether we see ourselves as part of the crowd that is surrounding the group who are being taught, or whether we see ourselves as part of that discipleship group, we are here listening and with those disciples struggling to understand what it is that Jesus is saying. And we have this emphasis on knowledge. Later, we're going to do attitudes and skills. And what we're talking about is there are certain things we need to know about being a disciple. And so we've been exploring that. We started with the first half of Matthew 5, and then we're finishing with the latter half of Matthew 7, which kind of frames in our series as we go through 5, 6, and 7 between those three different series. So this morning, we're on the last sermon in the series, and we're talking about foundations. And just to begin, I'm going to read you a part of a story. I'll get you to just advance that one slide. Don't worry, it's a short chapter, but we're going to have story time with Pastor Dave. This is the book, The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis. Wonderful work. It's fictional. And what it is, it's kind of a fantasy of a bus trip from hell into heaven. And on the bus are a variety of people that have come from this place that they know as the town, and they go up into heaven. They have the opportunity to stay. All they have to do is follow the people who have come and have been sent in order to help them make the journey further in and further up. Our narrator is one of the people on the bus, and the narrator notices that the people from the town are actually ghosts in this new place where they seem solid before. But compared to the people that are coming out to meet them, who are really solid, the narrator realizes that the people from the town are simply ghosts, wraiths, really. As the solid people came nearer still, I noticed that they were moving with order and determination, as though each of them had marked his man in our shadowy company. There are going to be affecting scenes, I said to myself. Perhaps it would not be right to look on. With that, I sidled away on some vague pretext of doing a little exploring. A grove of huge cedars to my right seemed attractive, and I entered it. Walking proved difficult. The grass, hard as diamonds to my unsubstantial feet, made me feel as if I were walking on wrinkled rock, and I suffered pains like those of a mermaid in Hans Andersen. A bird ran across in front of me, and I envied it. It belonged to that country and was as real as the grass. It could bend the stalks and spatter itself with the dew. Almost at once, I was followed by what I have called the big man, to speak more accurately, the big ghost. He, in his turn, was followed by one of the bright people. "Don't you know me?" he shouted to the ghost, and I found it impossible not to turn and attend. The face of the solid spirit, he was one of those that wore a robe, made me want to dance. It was so jocund, so established in its youthfulness. "Well, I'm damned," said the ghost. "I wouldn't have believed it. It's a fair knockout. It isn't right, Len, you know." What about poor Jack, eh? You look pretty pleased with yourself, but what I say is, what about poor Jack? He is here, said the other. You will meet him soon if you stay. But you murdered him. Of course I did. It is all right now. All right, is it all right for you, you mean? But what about the poor chap himself lying cold and dead? But he isn't. I have told you, you will meet him soon. He sent you his love. What I'd like to understand, said the ghost, is what you're here for. As pleased as punch, you a bloody murderer, while I've been walking the streets down there and living in a place like a pigsty all these years. That is a little hard to understand at first, but it is all over now. You will be pleased about it presently. Till then, there is no need to bother about it. No need to bother about it. Aren't you ashamed of yourself? No, not as you mean. I do not look at myself. I have given up myself. I had to, you know, after the murder. That was what it did for me. And that was how everything began. Personally, said the big ghost with an emphasis which contradicted the ordinary meaning of the word, personally, I'd have thought you and I ought to be the other way around. That's my personal opinion. Very likely we soon shall be, said the other, if you'll stop thinking about it. Look at me now, said the ghost, slapping its chest. But the slap made no noise. I gone straight all my life. I don't say I was a religious man, and I don't say I had no faults, far from it. But I done my best all my life, see? I done my best by everyone. That's the sort of chap I was. I never asked for anything that wasn't mine by rights. If I wanted drink, I paid for it. And if I took my wages, I'd done my job, see? That's the sort I was, and I don't care who knows it. It would be much better not to go on about that now. Who's going on? I'm not arguing. I'm just telling you the sort of chap I was, see? I'm asking for nothing but my rights. You may think you can put me down because you're dressed up like that, which you weren't when you worked under me. And I'm only a poor man, but I got to have my rights, same as you, see? Oh no, it's not so bad as that. I haven't got my rights, or I should not be here. You will not get yours either. You'll get something far better. Never fear. That's just what I say. I haven't got my rights. I always done my best, and I never done nothing wrong. And what I don't see is why I should be put below a bloody murderer like you. Who knows whether you will be? Only be happy and come with me. What do you keep on arguing for? I'm only telling you the sort of chap I am. I only want my rights. I'm not asking for anybody's bleeding charity. Then do, at once. Ask for the bleeding charity. Everything is here for the asking, and nothing can be bought. That may do very well for you, I dare say, if they choose to let a bloody murderer, all because he makes a poor mouth at the last moment, that's their lookout. But I don't see myself going in the same boat as you, see? Why should I? I don't want charity. I'm a decent man, and if I had my rights, I'd have been here long ago, and you can tell them I said so. The other shook his head. You can never do it like that, he said. Your feet will never grow hard enough to walk on our grass that way. You'd be tired out before we got to the mountains. And it isn't exactly true, you know. Mirth danced in his eyes as he said it. What isn't true? Said the ghost sulkily. You weren't a decent man, and you didn't do your best. We none of us were, and none of us did. Lord bless you, it doesn't matter. There is no need to go into it all now. You, gasped the ghost, you have the face to tell me I wasn't a decent chap. Of course, but must I go into all that? I will tell you one thing to begin with. Murdering old Jack wasn't the worst thing I did. That was the work of a moment, and I was half mad when I did it. But I murdered you in my heart, deliberately, for years. I used to lie awake at nights thinking what I'd do to you if I ever got the chance. That is why I have been sent to you now, to ask your forgiveness and to be your servant as long as you need one, and longer if it pleases you. I was the worst, but all the men who worked under you felt the same. You made it hard for us, you know, and you made it hard for your wife, too, and your children. You mind your own business, young man, said the ghost. None of your lips, see, because I'm taking any impudence from you about my private affairs. There are no private affairs, said the other. And I'll tell you another thing, said the ghost. You can clear off, see, you're not wanted. I may be only a poor man, but I'm not making pals with a murderer, let alone taking lessons from him. Made it hard for you and your like, did I? If I had you back there, I'd show you what work is. Come and show me now, said the other with laughter in his voice. It will be joy going to the mountains, but there will be plenty of work. You don't suppose I go with you? Don't refuse. You will never get there alone, and I am the one who was sent to you. So that's the trick, is it? Shouted the ghost, outwardly bitter, and yet I thought there was a kind of triumph in its voice. It had been entreated. It could make a refusal, and this seemed to it a kind of advantage. I thought there'd be some damn nonsense. It's all a clique, all a bloody clique. Tell them I'm not coming. See, I'd rather be damned than go along with you. I came here to see my rights, see? Not to go sniveling along on charity tied onto your apron strings. If you're too fine to have me without you, I'll go home. It was almost happy now that it could, in a sense, threaten. That's what I'll do, it repeated. I'll go home. I didn't come here to be treated like a dog. I'll go home. Damn and blast the whole pack of you. In the end, still grumbling, but whimpering also a little as it picked its way over the sharp grasses, it made off. This ghost in our story just kept demanding to have his own rights, thought about his own system of morality, the order of things, how decent people should be put ahead, that there's some sort of a give and take that should have secured his place. And of course, with those demands, it was all about himself, ultimately refusing to let go of himself in order to get what was really the longing of his heart, but it had become so corrupted. What was the foundation of that man's life in his life? Because what Lewis is telling us is that those foundations transcend just this mortal life, that they are a direction, a trajectory that continue on into eternity. Well, that brings us to Jesus' own words as he finishes this first great discipleship sermon with his disciples. He's getting down to the very foundation. They have been called by him. They have responded to him. They have sat down and listened to him. They have learned from him. And now, one last reminder, he talks to them about the foundation. So the key question to this, and we can go to the next slide, please, Suzette. The key question to this is, what will our foundation be? Will it be Jesus himself, or will it be something else? I read that section of the Great Divorce because that's a wonderful illustration to show us to ourselves, which is what Lewis is trying to do with this variety cast of characters that the narrator observes, and even the narrator himself, which is Lewis. It begins to show us to ourselves. It allows us to hear our own thoughts, our own words, our own heart's desires put into somebody else's mouth, said for us, so that we can begin to see some of the stark contrast of just where our lives are built or what our lives are built on. Jesus again gives us this clear division. We have an either or choice. There's no middle ground, no middle road. Either our lives are founded on Him, on what He says, or they aren't. They're founded on something else: our own thinking, our own rights, our own sense of moral, our own moral system, our own thinking about how the world and eternity should work. Anything other than Jesus is a problem. Now, we understand about foundations here in Regina, right? And we probably understand something about sandy soil. It's something that we've noticed as we've come to Regina from Ontario. The cracks in our basement of our rental house, these horizontal cracks that have to be secured on just about every wall of the house, because this thing just keeps sinking. We're probably going to have to mud jack our driveway soon. We don't even park on the thing. We just go over it and out again. But the weak soil causes a weakness in the foundation and it begins to crack. We understand something about foundations. And so Jesus is making the audacious claim that only His word alone, is the solid rock. We have to be careful here, because sometimes we get some really bad thinking when it comes to these categories. We can think Jesus is just one choice in the religious smorgasbord. Of course, He's not. And it's not because all religions are equal and we just choose our Christian religion. Rather, Jesus is the revelation of God. Jesus is God incarnate. Jesus is His Son. And so when Jesus comes, He's not functioning like a prophet. He's not like a Buddha or a Muhammad or a Moses, for that matter. Moses, under the old covenant for Israel, goes up on a mountain and mediates the covenant. The people of Israel are terrified by God's manifestations on the mountain, and they say, "Let Moses go up. Let Moses speak for God and speak between God and us." And so when Moses comes, he comes with those 10 commandments, with the commandments of God, and he says, "This is what God has said." And he begins to unpack them. Jesus, as we look at the Sermon on the Mount, is markedly different. Jesus says, "You have heard it said," and he'll talk about what Moses mediated. And then he says, "But I say to you." It's unmediated. This is God sitting down with us in our skin, face to face, and saying, "Here is what the kingdom is like." So it isn't that Jesus has given us a nice long laundry list of rules that we must keep in order to get in. And it's not that He is just one option among many, that if we choose Him, then we'll get in. Rather, Jesus is the revelation of God. He is letting us know, He is letting the world know, what does it look like to live in the kingdom? What does heaven look like? In Lewis's story, we have the sense of the ghosts are insubstantial and too insubstantial, so when they walk on the very real grass, it's like spikes on their feet. It hurts. They are not substantial enough to bend them because they don't belong to that country. So what Lewis is talking about, and what I'm trying to say, is that when we follow Jesus's commands, this isn't about believing the right thing, so now we're in, like we tick a box. It's about being informed of what heaven is like. and how we can begin stepping towards that mountain of God now so that we are becoming solid now, so that our feet are conformed to the grasses of heaven and we're ready to walk in. Does that distinction, is that making sense to you? Good. Lie to me if it's not, because I got to move on. So it's not that the ghost hasn't jumped through the right moral hoops. It's that his very attitude is unkingdom. He is attempting with this talk about rights and somebody else coming and his whole system, he is attempting to bring hell into heaven. And they cannot coexist. That's Lewis's whole point. That's why he names this the Great Divorce, because it is the divorce between heaven and hell. They are separate realms. You cannot carry hell, and you cannot insist on carrying hell into heaven. Hell has to be let go of in order to enter. So Jesus is talking about that, and he says, hear my words, everyone, and put them into practice. Not because if you do these things you'll get in, but because these things that are the things that must be done. These are the consistent with heaven things. This is heaven to do these things. Heaven here and now. Well, let's move on. We have this talk of standing and falling. It's easy enough for us to translate Jesus' words about standing and falling into our own daily lives. So we think about it and we say, okay, so if we put Jesus' words in practice today, bless you, then our lives are consistent with the kingdom. And if our lives are consistent with the kingdom, then we begin to be solid now. If our lives are founded on Jesus' word, on his revelation of who God is, what heaven is like, well, then our lives will be able to weather the storms of life. And that doesn't mean that life will be easy. Because when we talk about storms, we are necessarily saying there are going to be hard times. Times when we feel like the houses that Jesus is talking about, battered, flooded, whipped against. But it does say that if we found our lives on Jesus' word, then we will stand through those times. And we've seen that in our life together as a congregation, in the lives of individuals in our congregation. We have seen things come against people that you would think, from a worldly point of view, there's no way somebody could keep getting up and moving forward after being hit with that kind of pain, that kind of devastation. And then with awe, you see them stand, and you see them move forward, and you see them heal, and you see them not become embittered, but you see them forgive. You see them work to minister, to see that same freedom come to other people. It's awe-inspiring stuff. And all of that isn't something that's innate in some of those people. It is something that comes to us as a gift when we determine to found our lives on the words of Jesus. Then and only then are we living the kingdom values and are able to do those kinds of things. But it's not just about our own lives. It's also got a bigger sense to it. Jesus is talking about Judgment Day. And again, we come to Lewis's heaven and hell. We talked about this last week, that there is a sense of final destiny. So Lewis is famous for talking about heaven and hell in these ways. Nobody who desires heaven will miss it. And nobody is in hell who doesn't choose to be there. And that's part of his picture with this whole bus tour, with that conversation of the ghost. At every moment, that ghost had a real opportunity to put that stuff down and follow that ghost in and to stay and to be with God. Well, that's the same in our lives as well. There will be an ultimate test, an ultimate judgment, where we are really faced with the prospect, do we truly want to go with God? Or do we actually prefer life without God? Life set in our own terms and by our own ways? Standing or falling? But why do we keep talking about Jesus and discipleship in all of this? If we are Jesus' disciples, I keep using that term. Well, because when we come to Jesus' words, he lets us know that the issue isn't about belief. Belief by itself isn't true faith. And it's faith that is required for us to follow Jesus. It is faith that will open the gates of heaven to us. It is faith that will allow us to move further in and further up. Jesus says, whoever hears my words and puts them into practice will have a solid foundation. Not whoever believes in me. Jesus is saying it has to be more than just some mental assent. And we hear this all the time from people, especially when you're a pastor. If you start to talk to somebody about their faith, the first thing they'll say is, oh, I believe in God. Even if I don't go to church, I believe in God. As if belief in God is some sort of a hall pass. That's their guarantee. That's their magic bullet, the ace up their sleeves. This isn't a mental check mark that Jesus is looking for, thinking that this is good enough for God. There's a particular type of believing that's involved. When I'm on this tack, all I can think is my first theology professor, Dr. Dewey. He was a good man. And he used this illustration to make the point that I'm trying to make. There was once a man at Niagara Falls who had strung a cable over the falls. And as the crowds gathered to see what he was going to do, he's standing up on the wall, ready to walk on this cable across the falls, unsupported. And he calls out to the crowd, and he's the showman, and he says, so who believes that I can walk across this cable and back? Not very many hands went up, a couple. And then he did it. He went across and he comes back. Great applause. And he re-asks his question. He says, now who believes that I can go across and come back safely? Well, every hand in the room went up. Sure, they believe it. Great. So he pulls out a wheelbarrow and he says, who believes I can push this wheelbarrow across and come back safely? Well, not as many hands went up that time, but a little more than first time. So he pushes the wheelbarrow across and he comes back. And he says, now who believes I can push the wheelbarrow across and come back safely? Well, again, all the hands go up and there's great cheering. And he says, then who will get into the wheelbarrow? Faith is getting into the wheelbarrow. We can believe the man can push it across and come back, but faith is getting into the wheelbarrow. That's an illustration of saving faith as opposed to mere belief. That's the distinguishing mark. Can you go one more slide, please? Dietrich Bonhoeffer says it this way, 2 quotes from his book on discipleship. If people want to learn to believe in God, they have to follow the Son of God incarnate and walk with him. And then about a page later, he says, the concept of a situation in which faith is possible is only a description of the reality contained in the following 2 statements, both of which are equally true. Only believers obey, and only the obedient believe. Only believers obey, and only the obedient believe. Belief and obedience go hand in hand. That's what the illustration of the wheelbarrow is. To say, I believe in Jesus, is to say, I entrust my whole self, my eternity, everything I am, all that I have to Jesus as Lord, as Savior, as Messiah, as mine, as the way to heaven, as the way to have a relationship with God the Father, as my everything, my foundation. And so belief and obedience go hand in hand, and that is what makes up faith. Dietrich Bonhoeffer also makes the point that obedience comes first. He takes Matthew's gospel and he says, Jesus comes along and he calls the disciples, and we are actually offended by how quickly they drop everything and follow after Jesus. There's no rationale, there's no explanation, but at its base, Matthew and the other gospels show us what discipleship is all about. It is about obedience to the word of Jesus. And that's what Jesus says. If you hear my words and put them into practice, then you are like the wise man who built his house on the rock. Natasha, who we just brought up, is a wonderful example of this. She's been hearing the call of God over the last number of years. And I bet you, having sat and talked with her, she would have been happy to have sat for a few more years and just listened to that voice, just to make it clear, just to be 100%, just to make sure she wasn't making a mistake, just to make sure that everything would be safe and okay if she were to step out and do that, maybe to try and get some sort of a guarantee out of God, perhaps even to try and get a little more specific shape to just what God might mean by follow me or go into ministry or begin tracking. Maybe she would have liked more time to know what the ending would look like. Wouldn't we all? But she didn't wait. She stepped out in faith and obeyed. This is a wonderful illustration of what Jesus is talking about. If we hear his word, we must put it into practice. Just knowing it is no good. We have to practice it. We can go to our last slide. So, what about you? Are you a disciple of Jesus? Or are you just religious? I want you to take a couple minutes and just think about what your life is founded on. Is it founded on the words of Jesus? Or is it founded on your word? Is it a mental belief in Jesus? Yeah, I know Jesus is a good guy. Or have you put yourself in the wheelbarrow? Have you trusted him with all of you? Is Jesus the foundation of your life? Or is your life founded on the sand? Are you prepared to weather the storms of life? And are you prepared for the big storm that comes to us all when we stand before God? Are we ready to move further up and further in? Or are we going to go and sit and sulk on the bus? As we come to the table this morning, this is our opportunity to respond to these words, to these questions, to this challenge that I'm putting in front of you. For those of you who have put their faith in Jesus through belief and obedience, this is an opportunity for you to renew, to re-up, as it were, to say, yes, Jesus, I still want to be in the wheelbarrow. I still want my life built on this solid rock of your word. I want to be obedient. And then this meal becomes a renewing, a strengthening meal for you as you set out once more on that course. For those of us who have come to this place religiously, perhaps we heard something of ourselves in this ghost and we begin to recognize some of our own insubstantial thinking of rights and the way it all should work. This is an opportunity for us to abandon ourselves, to put ourselves aside, and all of that baggage, all of our rights and our morals and the way we think we should be treated. This is our chance to put those aside, to put ourselves aside, and to come and receive Jesus, Jesus alone, saying, yes, I will obey. Yes, I will follow. Yes, I will build my house on the rock. Yes, I will get into the wheelbarrow.